Hello, this is Dylan Toe from Everlook Photography, and we're going to do another anatomy of a shoot, this time from King George Beach on Kangaroo Island. So Kangaroo Island is accessible from Adelaide, about an hour and a half to Cape Jarvis at the ferry, and then we stayed in Kingscote, and King George Beach is around about here, about 45 minutes drive from Kingscote, and it's a beautiful drive. If these satellite shots were taken during winter, you'd see it's all green, so kind of rolling hills. And if you take the North Coast Road, it's a very well sealed dirt road. So as you arrive on King George Beach, this is all private. It's only accessible if you stay in these cottages here. So the public road takes you down to here, where I'd like to find out one day whether or not we can stay there. I couldn't find it on Airbnb. But as you arrive, you're pretty struck by the pebble beach and the ruggedness of the coastline, particularly the shapes of these cliffs here. And one day I'd like to explore further north to these coves around here, which look absolutely spectacular. So on the first visit, if you look on Photographer's Ephemeris, the sunset was really lighting up the cliffs over on that side. So what I did was I took a couple of shots there, and then I wandered over to this point here and saw some amazing rock formations over here, and also tried to take some shots around this area for that first shoot. So if we go to Lightroom, this was all taken at high tide, so if you want to shoot there, this is a rough indication of what it might look like during high tide. So took a couple of shots while setting up the kids to do some activities. So decent wave action, but the seas were pretty calm, so you could get some really dynamic shots, I'd imagine, if the seas were rougher or the weather a bit wilder. So then after taking the short exposure shots, I changed to a few long exposure shots with a 10-stop ND filter, trying to get the right duration of time. See, that was 30 seconds, and to get the desired cloud movement, I increased it to over 3 minutes. Unfortunately, the light started to fade because to the left of this scene is where the sun was setting, and there was some cloud there. So colors were starting to light up, and so I headed out to the point out here instead of shooting from this position here. And you can see that what I saw to the west was this amazing arch in the distance. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to try and visit there one day. But if you look around this corner, it's just sea. There's no beach to walk on. So there's no way you can easily access it. So I'm not sure if I'll do much with these particular shots, but this fin of rock looks very interesting to photograph. It's very narrow, so if you took a cross section of it, it would be like shooting a very upright sea stack in the right orientation. So Marianne doing a few things with the girls there. And so the focus of these images here was to try and get some water motion and some reverse sunset action with the pinks happening, but unfortunately that didn't really light up. Instead, directly into the sunset, there were some nice clouds for a little bit of time, and I've edited a couple of these using exposure blends to get that nice kind of chasm of water filling in with the tide. So I'd imagine at low tide you'd be able to walk out there and get some even more dynamic shots of this particular channel here. So I'm actually keen to explore this because in summer or in spring the sunset will be more in this direction. So you could stand here, or as I said, that large fin of rock to the left might do pretty well as well. So I thought that in order to get out to this particular spot, that would need some solo exploration. So I saved it for the very last evening of our trip, where the weather was, again, very good, like most of the trip. Calm at sea level, but quite changeable in the skies. So this is having accessed the sea arch. Now, in order to get here, it's a bit of a hike because you can't do it through a walk along the beach. So essentially, I had to climb over a couple of hills, which weren't too bad actually. So they were just grassy hills, no really tricky cliffs to negotiate. The only tricky bit getting here is a bit of a drop when you're around the corner to get to this spot where you have to jump off a little bit. And then in order to get to this vantage point, there's really not a lot of flexibility for you to do anything once you're down here because there's a little rock platform here and that's it. So you have to really commit to shooting this particular angle. In low tide, you might be able to wander down here, and the sunset is not directly through the arch, but to the right of it. And so I think in springtime, if you look at TPE, shifting over to this bit here, the arch kind of faces almost, the hole is almost kind of directly east-west. So I suppose at around equinox time, you should be able to get a shot with the sun coming straight through. I'll be coming in summer, so I doubt whether or not I'll be able to get one of those shots with a sun star through the arch, which is a nice kind of timed shot to get. But I took a few kind of compositional shots with short exposures and then went for some long exposures at varying exposure lengths. And then what happened was that I saw that there was a rainbow happening behind me. And from here, there was really no vantage point to shoot the rainbow very well, except for with a long lens. So I took a couple of shots, then I decided that because it seemed to be clearing around here, more of the action was likely to be where the rainbow was, and I was hoping that all of this might explode if it was clear on the horizon. So I packed up and shifted position back to shoot this rainbow with a bit of a more engaging foreground. So a couple of test shots. You see that really dramatic cloud, and with clarity in the horizon, I was hoping they would light up in terms of colors. The time lapse will show you what eventually did happen, and though it was nice, it didn't kind of burst as I had hoped. But despite the calm seas, there was some really nice wave action happening throughout. And once again, I don't know how safe this would be if the seas were any rougher than what they were at this particular time, because I somehow didn't get wet during this shoot, despite what it may look like on some of these shots. I was probably elevated about 1/2 meter to 1 meter off the water and pointing the camera down. And so I think the shot that I end up editing was this one here. And some really nice combinations. I might come back and do some of these for alternative water motion at some point where it's not so chaotic. I was drawn to the chaotic one, but I think there may be too much happening in the scene. But I do kind of like the fact that it kind of triangulated straight through to the double rainbow. One thing to add about the double rainbow was that I had a circular polarizer on for these to reduce the glint of water off the rock, but you just have to be very careful with rainbows to make sure that your polarizer is not in the orientation that polarizes out the rainbow and you end up taking some shots without the main feature in the background you were hoping for. So I didn't have time to take a long exposure of the scene, and I don't think it really suited it because I did want that dynamic action in the foreground. And because this was our last night, I didn't really hang around too much longer. But then I noticed that, well, why weren't those clouds kind of really bursting in color? And that's because there was some obscuring of the clouds on the horizon and really starting to light up the skies directly. Now, if you look at the arch I think I would have got some decent shots in the original composition I had, but I guess those are the decisions that you make, and I'll try to visit again at some other point. This was really a rushed composition because with the clouds around, I wasn't sure whether or not the light would be completely obscured. And one common practice I use when I'm shooting into light is to have some shots where I obscure the light source so that there's less flare around the foreground. In the meantime, Marianne was taking some shots at Kingscote, so completely different conditions while I was shooting away. I do like these shots more because there's direct light on the cliffs, but I didn't really have a good composition with this rock over here, so I tried to encompass that, and this one's just a half, so I don't really like that composition at all. So I tried to just get that whole rock involved there. But by that time, there wasn't too much direct light streaming onto those rocks there. So a bit of sacrifice to get the composition a bit more balanced, and great colors in the sky, but not that much light happening on the rocks there. So after the sun had gone down, nothing much happened with the color anymore, as the time lapse showed you before. And I basically packed up and started walking back, and over in Kingscote, some pinks while Marianne was with the kids shooting the fur seals near the pier. And I've edited one of these shots from her as well. And that was the end of a fantastic evening. Walked back, made it back to the car before it was completely dark, so I didn't have to walk in the eerie woods. And that really summed up what I thought was going to be the end of a great trip to Kangaroo Island. But then the next morning, there was some amazing mist happening over the whole of the area around Fleurieu Peninsula, Adelaide, streaming down to Kangaroo Island. So perhaps I'll do another one of these stories at a later date. But thank you again for listening, and